Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. I think for most of those who are participating and those who are in other time zones, good whatever time you have. My name is Kristina Kangaspunta. I'm the chief of the crime research section with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And I'm very happy to be the moderator of the first panel today. The first panel is discussing the scope and nature of the problem. But before going to the actual panel discussions, I would like to remind you of some technical issues which are connected specifically to the virtual meeting and how you could facilitate the meeting and the smooth implementation of the meeting. So first of all, please ensure that the microphone is muted and your camera disabled all the time. Only the times when you are speaking, please open these tools. There is an interpretation in 6 languages, and if you have any problems with the interpretation, you can send a chat message to our host, the ICT host, and I'm sure that they are able to fix it. If you want to take the floor, please register and send your registration for taking the floor or just if you want to have a question or other type of an intervention to the hosts through the chat message, and please indicate this message with the floor request. We need to be very, very careful with the time, since specifically with the virtual meeting, we do not want to have big delays. So basically, all the interventions shouldn't take more than 2 minutes. So there will be a person who will remind you if you should conclude or give the concluding remarks, so that we would all benefit of keeping the time as expected. Also, all interventions should be respectful and meaningful, and also focus on the issue, and hopefully also give some recommendations related to this session. Those you can also, those participants who are in the room, as we have some of you, I think you can approach the organizers in order to take the floor. Or you can also express your willingness to ask questions by informing us. So before going to the actual panelists of this panel, we would like to start by showing a short video which is connected to the topic from another point of view. So I think we are ready now to see the video.
То есть я проработал 7 месяцев. За этих 7 месяцев я не заработал вообще ни копейки. В 6 утра был подъем, иногда и раньше. То есть работали мы на фасадах, фасовали уголь и крыши. То есть успели поесть, это хорошо, не успели, работай дальше. Работали к 12 часам. Было такое, что вообще сутками работали, даже не спали. Мы держали, это на стройке, там где работали, мы там спали на полу. А в основном это детское кресло, короче, можно так сказать. Мылись мы на автомойке, там где моют машины. Были побои, тоже били, но не раз. То есть мне сказали, хочешь уходи. Я собрал вещи, уже собрался, уходим. То есть шел до двери, меня начали бить. То есть сказали, ты не уйдешь отсюда так просто. Короче, унижают до такой степени человека, что человек просто вынужден, у него в голове делается такое, что он хочет повешаться, чтобы это все не было. Заранее собрал вещи, и ждал момента, пока все уснут. Дождался момента и ушел. Пришел к девушке, она меня ждала уже. У нее я пробыл неделю дома, то есть прятался. Они названивали, угрожали, что там убьем, приедем, найдем, убьем, тебе будет плохо. Угрожали. Потом я написал, и благодаря этому заявлению освободили других людей, которые там работали тоже в рабстве, находились. Я ожидаю справедливого правосудия и возмещения морального ущерба. Мы будем ждать, потому что это надо дело довести до конца. Никто уже заднюю сдавать не будет. Потому что все понимают, если этих людей не посадить, то будет еще хуже. И не только нам, и это может повториться с любым человеком.
Попросил, говорит, поехали со мной зимой как раз. Говорит, заработаешь денег и поедешь после домой. Поехали. Сразу же нормально было, заплатили. За 3 месяца $270. Я семье выслал деньги. Он уехал домой. Говорят, начальник говорит, еще побудь месяц, еще подзаработаешь денег и поедешь. Побыл месяц еще. Говорю, я поеду домой. Он паспорта говорит, дай мне паспорта, оформить официально, что ты официально работал. Паспорта забрали. И все. Уже сколько раз подходил, мне надо домой ехать. Там проблемы дома. Еще побудь, еще побудь. И так получилось целый год. Я остался. И ни копейки не платили. Ничего. В секонд-хенде поедут, какую-нибудь одежду купят. И все. Готовили сами. Продуктами он покупал продукты, привозил. Готовили сами. В таких условиях, как мы жили, я никому не желаю. На лавочках спали по двое, по трое человек. Еще бывало, что и били. Дубинками, так, били. Не было, потому что документов не было, денег не было. Через границу без документов, без паспорта никак ты границу не пересечешь. Но это рабство тяжелое. Рабство. Я говорю, никому не желал бы в такое рабство попасть. Предательство над людьми. Спасибо полиции, что нас оттуда вытянули, вызволили оттуда. И находимся тут, под охраной, в этом хорошем центре. Следствие я себя спокойно, нормально вел. Всю правду говорил, как было. На все вопросы отвечал и адвокату, и следователям. Все рассказывали. Не знаю, кто какие показания давал, но всю правду рассказал, все как было. И били чем, и как били. Все рассказывал правду следователям. А чего бояться? Всю правду надо говорить. Но им за такое, как они делают, им больше срок надо давать.
Вас ищут.
Да, боюсь. Все боятся. Потому что выйдешь, мало что может быть, выйдешь в город, а назад не вернешься. Садят машину, вывезут куда-нибудь, и все. Родственники начальника ищут. Чтобы следствие шло хорошо, чтобы все доказали. Этим людям, которые торговлей людьми занимаются, им прощения нету. Я то считаю, что можно встретиться лицом к лицу. А таким людям надо в глаза смотреть и правду говорить.
So I think this video actually showed quite clearly why we are all gathered here today and why we have these panels and why we have these discussions. I think it was quite clear from those stories of the victims that what they really want is, first of all, that they can tell their stories, that they are believed, and also that they get justice. I think this is important for them so they could really feel that the justice is done, that they have access to justice, and then they can have a closure of their own cases, they can see that somebody is punished because of the wrongdoings that these people were doing to them, and then the victims, they could actually move on. So I think we can start our panel, and before going to the panelists, I would like to show very few slides, some new findings that we have from our global report on trafficking in persons, which we are producing at UNODC every second year. And this report, the next report will come out later this year, but I wanted to show you some of the results which we have for this report, which probably can somehow understand the situation specifically in the OSCE region concerning the convictions and prosecutions. So I will go directly to the... So in this slide, actually, what you can see is the situation concerning the legislation. So in blue, you can see the legislation, or those countries which do have a legislation which is in compliance with the United Nations Protocol against Trafficking in Persons. Then in red, you can see those countries which have a partial legislation, which means that not all forms of trafficking in persons are criminalized in their legislation. And then in green, you can see those countries which do not have a specific or special legislation on trafficking in persons. And as you can see, in 2003, when the protocol came into force, the situation wasn't that good. There were not that many countries which had legislation on trafficking persons. Actually, more than half of the countries globally didn't have a specific legislation criminalizing trafficking in persons. So this was in 2003. Currently, now in August this year, we have most of the countries in the world, they do have legislation against trafficking in persons, which is in compliance with the protocol. We have only 9 countries which do have a partial legislation, and then another 3 countries which do not have a legislation against trafficking in persons. So a big change happened after the protocol against trafficking in persons came into force. And after that, we have had a very good situation concerning the legislation. So we are, of course, very pleased because of that. However, as we do know, this is not enough. We need to also enforce and implement the legislation in order to have the results which are meant to be there with this legislation. So the next slide is actually showing, and I'm sorry that the slide is not totally so beautiful at this point, but these are the preliminary figures from our new report. And as you can see, these are the conviction trends, rates of conviction trends in Europe and Central Asia. So the rate is how many convictions do we have per 100,000 population. And in red, you can see the global average. And you can see that it has been quite flat. There's a little bit of an increase now in the recent years, but it is quite flat. Then we have in blue, we have Western and Southern Europe, where the rate has been a little bit fluctuating, but it is quite flat also. And it is actually in the recent years, it is going down. In gray, we have Central and Southern, Southeast Europe, which is also quite stable. There are some ups and downs, and now it is going upwards. And then we have in green, we have Eastern Europe and Central Asia, which has in the beginning had a quite good rate of convictions, but it is really clearly going down quite significantly. These, of course, this is sort of like showing a little bit of the trends, but what is really concerning here is something which you see in the left-hand side of this slide. And this is the actual rates. So these are how many convictions in Europe, Central Asia, there are per 100,000 persons. And currently the global rate is a little bit below 3 persons per 100,000 population, and the Western and Western and Southern European trend is around the same level. Then we have a little bit higher levels in other parts of Europe and Central Asia, but they are all below 5. This is the trend in North America. Don't worry about, you look at only the red and the blue line. And I need to know that from the US we got only the federal figures, so that's why it is an underrepresentation. But still, you can see a little bit of the trend. And now also in North America, during the recent years, since 2015, the rate is going down. And here also you can see the actual numbers of the rate, and they actually don't go, they are very, very low. So the end result, which I wanted to show here, is that even though there are some good years and some a little bit not that good years with the convictions, in all, the rates and the levels are extremely low. So if we compare with some other crimes, I wanted to show just some other crimes. So homicide rate in Europe, which is really a rare and really serious crime, is at the same level as trafficking in persons conviction rates. If we take assault, we have a conviction rate which is 70. Sexual assault is around 5. And we do know that sexual assault is one of those crimes which is not very much reported to the police, and there are exceptionally low convictions also in that crime. If we take then more property crimes, burglary and theft, the conviction rates, of course, are much, much higher. In burglary it is 40, and in theft it is 170. So I think that we really have a problem with the conviction rates. Also, we saw that the legislation was already there, but there was not really a same kind of an increase of convictions as should be expected with this kind of legislation. Of course, we can then claim that, okay, fine, probably there are trafficking is not happening in these regions, and that's why we don't have convictions. However, let me try it. Here is a global map on trafficking in persons flows. So where people are trafficked from and where they are trafficked to. And you can see 3 different hubs on that map, which are destination hubs. One is in the Middle East, one is in Western and Southern Europe, and one is in North America. So as you can see, there is absolutely no way to claim that there are no victims going, for example, to Western and Southern Europe or in North America, because actually most of the flows are going to that direction. So there is clearly a contradiction with that. And the last slide, which I wanted to show to you, is share of actually a little bit of a gender aspect, which is share of prosecutions by sex. So this is showing the female and male persons share of women and men who are prosecuted. And as you can see, in Western and Southern Europe and Central and Southeastern Europe, around 20%, a little bit more, of the prosecuted offenders, they are women. And this is actually sort of like a little bit even less than the global average, which is around 30% of prosecuted offenders are women. But it is going to that direction. The same kind of results are found also on investigation and convictions. But when you go to Eastern Europe and Central Asia, you can see that actually the situation is totally different, and women are more than 70% of prosecuted offenders are women. So this is also a finding which we have had already for several years, and actually we do not have a very good explanation on that trend. There are several possibilities. One possibility is that because Eastern Europe and Central Asia is mainly an origin region for trafficking in persons, so women are used for recruiters. But it sort of like doesn't really explain the whole situation, because this is also happening in some other origin regions, and we don't see such a big percentage of female offenders who have been prosecuted or convicted. Then we could also think that women might be occupying some tasks and roles in the organized crime groups which are exceptionally visible, so that they are actually exposed to the detection more than men, which might be part of the explanation. And the third explanation, which I have heard, is that probably part of those women who have been prosecuted, they actually are victims of trafficking. And being, for example, a recruiter is one form of trafficking, so that, for example, the offenders can say to the victims that if you don't bring me 5 new victims, then I will harm your family, or something else. So it might be one of the explanations also. However, we would need to have more research on this topic. So I will end here, and I would like to go to our panel. We have wonderful speakers in that panel, and I would like to invite the first speaker, who is Ms. Camelia Stoina, who is the Chief Prosecutor of International Cooperation Service, Directorate for Investigating Organized Crime and Terrorism, General Prosecutor's Office in Romania. And she will share her analysis of the challenges in prosecuting traffickers operating across borders. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I will try to fit into the 8 minutes allocated for the presentation. I will start with my presentation. The entire system of Romania, it was created in order to protect the right of the citizens. Through dedicated structures for prevention and countering trafficking in human beings, legislation, and also the international cooperation. This represents the 3 main pillars which are working together in order to protect the right of citizens. Directorate for Investigating Organized Crime and Terrorism, the acronym, short acronym, it's DCOT. The institution that I represent here has a national-wide structure and jurisdiction with dedicated prosecutors dealing together with the police forces with over 700 new cases each year. The National Agency for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings is performing as well prevention and raise awareness program in social medium exposed to the trafficking in human beings. The rate of the prosecuted cases are between 15 and 20%. Unfortunately, the conviction rate is a little bit lower. In a matter of international cooperation, we try during the years to establish a common approach, also to identify the most effective channels. We realize from our experience that contact and informal dialogue have often proven to be the key to a proper tactical approach of complex and of transborder investigation, support us in focusing on victim identification as well and their protection. I want to point out in this slide only the effort which was concluded last year in 14 joint investigation teams set up by Romania with different authorities which they are considered the destination countries for our victims. Like United Kingdom, Italy, Spain, Germany, Norway, and others. According with the figures of our national office at Eurojust, during the last 7 years, we succeeded to organize coordination meeting concluded in joint investigation teams agreements, trafficking in human beings being on the first place as a subject of our meetings. This is also good and also bad from the point of view of the origin country of the victims. This diagram shows that despite of the effort made by law enforcement, human trafficking continues to be an evolving phenomenon, both from the point of view of the interest expressed by traffickers who are in the continuous search of illegal and fast enrichment means, as well as from the profile recruitment of the victim, which are coming from disadvantages environment, as well as abusive environment, lacking of education, and poverty. This mapping is a result of the European project called Westeros, name Enhancing the Fight Against Trafficking in Human Beings, and it proceeds through advanced financial investigation. This project is co-founded by European Union, and we have partners, the authorities from Austria and the Netherlands. As a challenge, like origin country of the victim of trafficking in human beings, law enforcement are aware that we are continuing to be a state of origin due to the poverty as well as lack of education, even failure of the prevention and raise awareness program in social medium exposed to THB. Despite of the effort of the national agency who develop a lot of programs in school and also in media. The main challenge for law enforcement is the insidious way of recruitment of the victim, which are involving deception and false promises of employment, good working condition, and so on, which make us to have a different approach in a matter of probation. But also we have to take into consideration that human trafficking is a crime driven by demand and is one of the most profitable offenses, being ranked on the 3rd place in the world. Fighting this crime requires a multi-agency approach, which is highlighted in the National Strategy of Romania for 2018-2022. Which is focused on an educational system, also on the victim protection, and also on the training of law enforcement. In a matter of legislation, indeed, we have incriminated trafficking in human beings and pimping in aggravated circumstances, which are provide or foreseen similar action. Even if the investigators know very well the differences between those crimes, starting from the first action, which is recruiting versus facilitating, we consider that this provision of pimping should be amended abroad. And sometimes this involve evidence on all stages of human trafficking process, and it takes time more than we want. And the second issue is the trial stage, where since 2014, with the intention to speed up the trial in front of the court, the legislative power introduced the preliminary chamber, which were meant to speed up the trial by examining the file and also the evidence within 60 days. But unfortunately, because of the exception and other things, this phase now is of victim of trafficking. This legal provision being addressed to all type of exploitation with trafficking. And the punishment provided by the law is between 6 months and 3 years. And also we have many cases with conviction, and we hope to be a good sign for traffickers, for the clients, let's say, in not asking services of the victims. In the last years, Romania has developed, improved, and increased the capacity of performing parallel financial investigation in trafficking in human beings cases, but significant challenges still exist, of course.
Layla, I need complete silence for the next hour.
Sorry, I will finish in 2 minutes. And the low number of the police officers that are working in the financial investigation unit from the police, and also highly specialized financial investigators like experts. Through several European projects, as well with the support of our National Institute of Magistracy, we organize training sessions addressed especially through to the police officer and to the prosecutor. We must continue this kind of training and enhance the training, enlarge as well the number of the judges which are going to participate in this. Also, we intend to keep the effort also on the prevention. This year, at the beginning of the year, we signed together with the national agency a common plan of measures for prevention and raise awareness programs in school, and the target group is the young generation between 8 to 18. We should start this project in 16th of March, but because of the pandemic, and we must postpone a little bit our effort, but we will not be abandoned. And in the last slide, you already know, all of you, the main challenges which are appear at the international level. One of the factor is the differences between the legal framework in European Union countries and the third country. Also, a challenge is the demand of cheap labor services. Foreign diaspora, also communities across Europe, and sharp differences in the living standard between the member states. But take into consideration that inside the European Union, there is a free movement of the person. Romania is depending very much by a closer cooperation, followed by notification from the destination country, as well as by coordinated measure and common effort in order to discourage and to reduce the demand that foster all form of exploitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this interesting presentation concerning the situation in Romania, but also discussing the challenges which you have there concerning trafficking persons and the and the criminal justice responses to trafficking in persons. I think what I took from your presentation is the importance to have specialized structures in a country so that you can really have the professional capacity to respond to this crime. And the other issue, which I think I heard, was the importance of international cooperation and how challenging it might be, but however, it is very, very important in concerning this the investigations concerning trafficking in persons. To move on, we have our next speaker, who is Mr. Oleg Tsatelepin, who is the judge of the Supreme Court from Russian Federation. And he will share his experiences and analysis of the challenges in prosecuting and sentencing traffickers of human beings. And his presentation will be in Russian. Please, you have the floor.
Добрый день, Ваше Превосходительство.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. The Supreme Court of the Russian Federation would like to thank the organizers of the 20th Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons for this invitation to take part in this discussion of what's a very relevant issue today, namely making criminal prosecution of human trafficking more effective. Today, we've already heard about this global trend, towards a decrease over recent years in the number of prosecutions in human trafficking cases. And at the same time, we've been seeing an increase in the number of victims identified. Now, we have been seeing this trend in Russia also. Over the last 5 years, the number of convictions in human trafficking cases has gone down nearly twofold, from 48 people in 2015 to 16 people in 2019. Now, we realize that these figures, unfortunately, do not mean that we have won the fight in combating this monstrous crime that persists in the 21st century. We realize just how many human traffickers remain a latent threat and are going unpunished. And what we deplore even more is the number of victims of these crimes that have no access to justice and cannot obtain the needed protection from the state. You could say, in fact, that with the impunity for the traffickers, the victims are paying a double price. First of all, they fall victim to the human traffickers. They are being sold as if they were a thing. And then these victims cannot receive the needed support from the state and restore their rights because criminal cases are not opened. And so formally speaking, legally speaking, they're not recognized as victims. And so today it's very important to understand the scale and the nature of the issues we're dealing with here at this conference so that we can come up with effective recommendations to improve the quality of criminal prosecution. Now, in my presentation, I will look at a number of the factors that, in our view, are contributing to the low prosecution rate in human trafficking cases. And based on the Russian experience, I will share a few thoughts with you on how to address these problems. First, to make a criminal prosecution more effective, we need to have specific provisions in our criminal law on human trafficking. Now, this is already the case in many countries, but just having these provisions on the books does not guarantee consistent implementation in practice. In order to ensure that these provisions on human trafficking are actively used, it's very important to look above all at how they are actually set out in the criminal law. In Russian criminal law, for example, human trafficking comprises not just recruitment, transport, transfer, concealing, or receiving people, but also the purchase and sale and other transactions involving persons. And a study of legal practice shows that it is these latter actions, in fact, with which human traffickers are being charged most often. In other words, these are the convenient working tools for the judicial authorities. Also, since 2008, transaction and sale and other transactions involving persons can be carried out for any purpose, not just with the purpose of exploitation, as was the case before 2008, and as was foreseen in the Palermo Protocol. This amendment to our criminal law has substantially had a substantial impact on the criminal prosecution statistics. If we look at the number of prosecutions before and after 2008, we see that there has been a substantial increase, more than threefold compared to before 2008. This concept of human trafficking, and the concept of human trafficking in Russia, we don't have an element that's in the Palermo definition on the means of conducting human trafficking. This is not mandatory in the Russian definition, but we think that this legal approach could be useful because it makes it possible to cover a broader range of dangerous actions and to protect a larger number of the victims of human traffickers. And so, as we see it, the factors that have an impact on prosecution rates are the difficulties in actually applying the provisions in criminal law, and also not monitoring the legal practice of the provisions in human trafficking, which results in a situation where the legislators do not have information on the difficulties that the police, the investigators, the prosecutors, and the judges actually encounter in prosecuting and investigating human trafficking cases. Second, criminalizing human trafficking in national law. This is a first and very important step, but not the only step. Also very important is to have the higher courts interpret the provisions on human trafficking. In Russia, only the Supreme Court has the power to interpret the law. And on 24th December 2019, we adopted a resolution on court practice in human trafficking cases and related crimes, such as abduction of persons and unlawful deprivation of freedom. The text of this document has been sent to the organizers of the conference. The Russian and the English versions are published on our site. In the work on this resolution, we, of course, looked at the international legal practice with regard to the key definitions and concepts in human trafficking, including the definitions in European law and the law of the CIS countries. And we also studied very carefully the so-called soft law, in other words, the various documents, handbooks and so forth published by the OSCE. And the work that we carried out, as a result, we were able to provide a legal interpretation of the main practical issues in application of the human trafficking provisions. In particular, we interpreted all of the main elements of the Palermo definition of human trafficking. Also, we gave clarifications about when human trafficking should be considered a crime actually committed. We noted that for these purposes, having exploitation present is not an essential condition. We stressed here that the movement of the victim from one place to another is also not an essential condition for the crime to be considered committed. If the human trafficking process was interrupted by the police at the recruitment stage, this would be enough for the crime to be considered to have been committed in the form of recruitment, even if there was no movement or exploitation of the victims. It's important to underscore here that the legal positions of the Supreme Court on practice in human trafficking cases is addressed to judges, but these clarifications should also be used by the police, the investigators, and the prosecutors in their practical activity before the court proceedings take place. We hope that the work carried out by the Supreme Court to interpret the concepts in human trafficking will help to step up law enforcement activity to open and to investigate criminal cases and to restore in the courts justice for the victims of human traffickers. We also believe that exchanging views and best practice on raising the effectiveness of prosecution in human trafficking cases and legal protection for the victims of these crimes would make it possible to have this conference come up with useful recommendations for the countries taking part in the alliance and the countries in the OSCE region. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this legal analysis, which of course was extremely interesting, and presenting the Russian legislation and also how it is based on the Palermo Protocol, but however it also reflects the country needs and some other realities in the countries. So I think this was very, very interesting, and thank you very much for presenting it and also giving the recommendations how to increase the successful prosecutions. We move on to our next speaker who has been around for some time. I have known her for many years in the circles which are discussing trafficking persons, and her name is Maria Antjelković, and she is the executive director and co-founder of the Serbian NGO Astra Anti-Trafficking Action. And she will share her analysis of the major bottlenecks in prosecuting traffickers and delivering justice to victims in the Balkans. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Christina, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation will mainly focus on the prosecution of the criminal act of trafficking from the perspective of trafficked persons. During the last 20 years, Astra supported 534 victims of trafficking, and we have received more than 43,000 calls through our SOS hotline. We also provided more than 45,000 different services: medical, legal, psychological, economic empowerment, and support during the reintegration process. It is well known that all around the world, victims of trafficking need a great courage to report what have happened to them and to participate in the criminal procedure. Most of them are afraid they will meet their trafficker face to face in the courtroom, and if they testify, they will jeopardize their families, children, parents, and friends, because traffickers, they know where they live. They are worried that the trial will last forever and they will not have strength till the end. They are afraid their name and photo will end up in the local newspaper. They are scared of being exposed to the public condemnation. They are afraid no one will believe to their part of the story. Some of them, they really deeply believe that the police officer, prosecutor, and the judge are closely related to trafficker because traffickers told them so, or because recently they saw a local police officer having a drink with a trafficker. The fear is that they will stand alone in the courtroom and by no one by their side, and they are terrified that the defense lawyer will turn them apart by the questions. Their worst nightmare is the trafficker will be found not guilty and free again, and their biggest fear is there is no justice at last. And this is not the end of the list. Out of courtroom, they have real life to live, to try to find and keep a job, to smile to their children, to be a good daughter or a son, to pretend life is normal again. But we shouldn't underestimate their strength. And all they need from you is trust and justice. Every year, my organization collects judgments on trafficking in human beings and monitor court trials, and our legal team provides information to trafficked persons on their rights and represent them before the court. Thanks to this privilege, being in everyday contact with trafficked persons, we identify several major bottlenecks to prosecute traffickers and deliver justice to victims. First of all, it's a lack of full implementation and possibilities already provided in our laws. In most of the countries in the region, as Christina already said in her presentation, our laws are in line with international standards and European directives. But in spite of this, the provisions are not fully applied in practice. Serbian law, for example, allows granting a victim a status of especially vulnerable witness. But recent legal analysis that we conducted on trafficking judgments shows that only 1/3 of the victims are getting this status in practice. Second example would be definitely what we all know is that victims of trafficking repeat their stories at least 7 times from the moment of identification to the final reintegration, which of course caused a tremendous secondary traumatization, but still use a video link is not a common practice, even there are technical possibilities to do so now. The second bottleneck that we identify is lack of proactive investigation and collecting evidence other than victim testimonies. Serbian Criminal Code prescribes criminal act of trafficking under the Chapter 34 called Criminal Offense Against Humanity and Other Goods Protected by International Law, together with war crimes, terrorism, and other severe criminal offenses, which shows that Serbia recognized trafficking as a really serious criminal act. However, the court practice shows that in many cases, prosecutors decide to do prequalification of criminal act of trafficking to mediation in prostitution, which again leads to minor punishment. Only last year, 50% of all trafficking cases in court ended up with settlements with traffickers, which means 9 out of 10 cases, prequalification was done from trafficking to mediation in prostitution, and in all 87% of cases, traffickers got suspended sentence. You can imagine how hard it is to receive this information. Not to mention that compensation claim is almost never part of this settlement. Only last year, in 75% of cases in judgments, traffickers in Serbia were convicted from 3 to 5 years of jail. In recent years, we discovered a lot of cases of labor exploitation, but still no prosecution happened in these cases. Or what we need in these cases actually is financial investigations and asset confiscation. And last but not least, bottleneck that we identify is definitely lack, and we will talk more about that tomorrow, I guess, it's lack of full implementation of victim-centered approach and victims' rights. When I say this, I mean full implementation of data and privacy protection, implementation of non-punishment provision, and obligatory legal representation of victims. Last year, only 1/3 of victims had a lawyer with them in the courtroom. Compensation for trafficked persons is not a privilege, it's their right. In half of the cases, criminal court judges are referring victims to the civil court procedures, which in practice means, as you all know, that these procedures are very long, very expensive, and victims need to face their traffickers again. Together with our colleagues from Ostrada network, years now we are advocating for introducing the compensation fund for victims of trafficking, which is one of the most efficient compensation tools in some countries. Regarding improvements in the last 5 years, let me just give several positive examples. For example, many training and permanent education of professionals resulted with a better treatment of victims, especially in the investigation process. The essence is to have governments with a strong political determination to fight human trafficking and to build systems that are effective and works in practice. Again, it's important to remember that the system is based on individuals. The positive example I have is actually from the crisis caused by COVID-19 pandemic, when after received 71% of calls increased, and we had 44% increased number of field actions. Our clients were disturbed like all other citizens, but also some of them couldn't reach state institutions. That is why they called more often. However, during that time, when one of the Serbian prosecutors coordinated the action of saving 5 victims who were literally enslaved in field of agriculture, one of them for 18 years in total. Despite all the obstacles and state of emergency, the prosecutor even managed to organize hearing through the video link and conduct proactive investigation to collect enough evidence to file an indictment against traffickers. Instead of conclusion, allow me to make several tips to the prosecutors and law enforcement. First of all, please be aware that low prosecution leads to low conviction rates, which leads into the widespread impunity, which again leads to the low trust in the criminal justice system. Trafficked persons lose hope that the criminal justice system is built to help, designed to help them. The second tip would be that permanent education and proactive investigation and exchange of good practices with colleagues transnationally are the essence of this success. COVID-19 pandemic crisis brought new challenges in assisting victims, but also in prosecuting these criminals. Economic crisis that follows will put many people in risk of being trafficked. Be trained and well prepared to larger number of victims identified that are coming, because they will need your stronger prosecution response. And last but not least, be aware of the power that you have to traffic persons' lives. Without early assistance, sustainable long-term support, and inclusion into society of trafficked persons, there is no successful prosecution. Prosecutors and law enforcement representatives could have a great role not only in bringing a justice, but also recovery to the victims as well. This is best described in one of the statements of our clients after she heard that her trafficker who exploited her for 4 years was convicted. She said to the prosecutor in charge, "Only now I can breathe and live again. I trust to people. I'm free again to continue with my life." Thank you for that. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for reminding us on the victims' needs and how difficult and how much encourage it is needed from the victims to be actually part of the criminal justice process. Also, I think it was very good reminder to understand and hear about the bottlenecks and the challenges which we do still have in order to have successful prosecutions, which are important for victims and for them to get the justice. So our last speaker today is Ms. Hilary Axam, who is the Director of Human Trafficking Prosecution Unit with the US Department of Justice. So you have the floor, please.
Good afternoon and good morning to all, depending on the time zone. It is my distinct honor and privilege to address this esteemed group of colleagues. Many of the points the previous speakers identified are central to this issue, and I want to emphasize them. Obviously, the issue of declining prosecutions globally is a matter of utmost urgency to all nations who have committed to combating trafficking, for the obvious reason that prosecutions are central not only to holding perpetrators accountable, but also to prevention of future trafficking and protection of the victims. Many victims do not feel safe unless and until their perpetrators are convicted. I'm going to describe some of the challenges and bottlenecks we encounter in the United States, which are strikingly similar to those identified by the esteemed panelists who preceded me, and some observations of solutions and responses that have proven effective in addressing some of these challenges. First, state the obvious. Trafficking is a hidden crime. The primary evidence of psychological coercion is invisible. And as we prosecute more traffickers, the traffickers are more adept at concealing their crimes, increasingly relying on invisible chains of psychological coercion rather than overtly detectable physical means of coercion. As they rely more on psychological coercion, our to provide statements and testimony.
Und wir sind daher immer mehr auf die Opfer
These crimes and proving them in courts of law. Yet, as we all know, the manipulation, deception, intimidation, and the trauma inflicted on victims are all obstacles to victims' participation. This requires a high level of very specialized expertise in victim-centered, trauma-informed methods of detecting trafficking crimes, earning the trust of victims, securing their cooperation as key witnesses, and building an effective prosecution around the victim statements. This requires the simultaneous engagement of victim stabilization experts using trauma-informed expertise, of investigators who can corroborate the victim's testimony, thereby alleviating some of the litigation risk, some of the prosecution risk, and of prosecutors to continually evaluate the strength of the victim's statement and the strength of the corroborating evidence. This requires an intensive, coordinated effort. It's not successive, it's simultaneous throughout the investigation and prosecution of the victim experts, the investigation experts, and the prosecution experts. On top of that, as my colleagues have referenced, these crimes can be long in duration, spanning months or years. They can be vast in their geographic reach, spanning multiple nations. And they're very complex and cross-cutting in their nature, often involving financial crimes, organized crime, border security violations, national security threats, narcotics violations, as we increasingly see addictive drugs used as a means of coercion and control to maintain control over victims. So in addition to requiring investigative, prosecutorial, and victim stabilization expertise, within the law enforcement sector, it requires specialized expertise of numerous different enforcement programs. For this reason, an effective law enforcement response transcends the typical structures and silos that define areas of specialization and requires convening a multidisciplinary team that will bring to bear that expertise in traumatized vulnerable victims, that expertise in transnational organized crime, expertise in financial crime, in narcotics. These are all areas that require intensive expertise to mount an effective enforcement and prosecution program to counter human trafficking threats. And I might add, the trauma-informed expertise is not only an area of specialized expertise requiring intensive training in its own right, it also requires unlearning much of the training that law enforcement typically receives in connection with their other enforcement priorities. Trauma-informed interviewing to elicit reliable victim statements often runs contrary to everything that has been trained into law enforcement, things that are taken as indicators of deception or lack of cooperation, such as conflicting statements, difficulty recalling specifics, emotional reactions. These non-physical cues can be easily interpreted by law enforcement as counter indicators, undermining a victim's credibility, reliability, and ability to testify or provide a statement that will be credited by the courts. Whereas trauma-informed expertise indicates that these are very typical of traumatized victims. And we have to unteach much of law enforcement training to mount an effective victim-centered trauma-informed response. In addition to this coordination need that transcends typical law enforcement structures, I just want to highlight some of the challenges of mobilizing political will behind trafficking prosecutions. And this is a global challenge that's inherent in the trafficking threat itself. It's not specific to any particular administration or political philosophy or even any particular set of law enforcement priorities. And that is, first of all, for all the reasons I just described, what an incredibly resource-intensive undertaking it is to mount an effective enforcement and prosecution effort, requiring, in a sense, restructuring to streamline coordination among multiple areas of specialized expertise. So in some prosecution areas, a declaration of political will can elevate the efforts of an existing justice sector entity or unit or structure. In trafficking, that declaration of political will has to be accompanied by mobilizing significant resources and doing so across multiple sectors of government, immigration authorities, labor regulating authorities, social service, human service, protection of vulnerable communities. All of these sectors must be mobilized simultaneously. So the elevated political will that this entails poses a significant challenge. Add to that the long time horizon to see a return on an investment. These are complex cases. As referenced, the violation itself can often span months or years or sometimes decades. A typical investigation and prosecution can require months or years of effort of multiple victim protection and enforcement partners. Politicians who declare a priority area typically want to see results quickly. To mobilize political will in combating human trafficking, we have to manage the expectations that this is a long-term undertaking and that investigating, prosecuting, and dismantling a vast transnational organized enterprise will require months of behind-the-scenes effort, years of behind-the-scenes effort before the politician can tout their success in that space. And finally, there are political perils associated with truly prioritizing efforts to combat trafficking in persons, precisely because the very factors that render victims vulnerable to being exploited by traffickers are factors that can complicate political affinity for seeking justice for the victims, specifically victims who are undocumented migrants, victims who have criminal histories, victims who have drug dependency, experiencing acute poverty, homelessness, marginalized indigenous populations, the very sectors of society that lack a political voice and political will are the ones most vulnerable to trafficking. So when we ask for political will to combat trafficking, we have to very conscientiously manage the message and the potential political pitfalls associated with that, or else we are missing the challenge of mobilizing political will. In my final remaining minutes, I just want to emphasize some strategies that have proven effective at overcoming these challenges. We constructed an initiative and repeated it as a pilot twice, each time over a 2-year period, in select pilot areas geographically that were very diverse in the existing law enforcement structures and in the contours of the human trafficking threat. And each time this initiative proved highly effective because it was tailored specifically to overcoming these challenges. We call it the Anti-Trafficking Coordination Team Initiative, or ACT Team Initiative. And some of its key features involve, first, bringing together all the key anti-trafficking enforcement partners, the victim specialists, as well as the investigators, as well as the prosecutors, formulating an interagency consensus on best practices in victim-centered trauma-informed detection, then securing high-level leadership commitment up front to implementing these strategies and providing intensive infusions of expertise to the field from specialized units at each relevant agency. The intensive training throughout this process led by specialized units at the prosecutorial offices, at the investigative agencies, proves essential. And each time we did this, the combination of high-level leadership, intensive infusions of specialized expertise, and streamlined coordination among different enforcement partners, we produced remarkable increases in prosecution results. And we're looking forward to sharing these experiences with others and using them as a model going forward to overcoming many of the inherent prosecution challenges that my esteemed colleagues have identified and that we're experiencing along with anti-trafficking authorities around the globe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for presenting these ideas for how to increase the successful prosecutions. Two issues which I actually sort of like took from your speech, which sort of like for me are also important, is that the trafficking persons is a complicated crime. And because it is so complicated, it really needs a specialized expertise from different fields. And in order to use this specialized expertise for successful prosecution, people need to work together. So there needs to be a coordinated action, there needs to be cooperation. And the other issue, which is very important, is the political will. I think this is reflected really in the resources, it is reflected in the prioritization, and it is reflected in many of the issues which are connected to successful prosecution. The panel discussion, or the panelists are, we have completed the list of panelists, and I would like now to open the floor to the, okay, there are some, I need to keep in mind the time. So I would like to open the floor to remarks and questions. And I would really like to remind all speakers that you have 2 minutes to speak. That's the maximum time. And 2 minutes goes very, very quickly. So I would first like to invite the distinguished representative of the European Union to take the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. The European Union and its member states are pleased to participate in this 20th High-Level Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons Conference. We would like to thank the OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings for organizing this conference despite the current challenging circumstance. The EU welcomes the focus of this year's Alliance Conference on the prosecution of perpetrators, which is indeed a cornerstone of long-term efforts in combating trafficking in human beings. We would like to thank all the speakers for their contributions, their interesting data they presented, highlighting some of the elements of the problematics with respect to the prosecution of traffickers, as well as for illustrating the urgency of focusing on this topic. 20 years after the adoption of the Palermo Protocols, we agree that there is a need for improving the efficiency of investigations and prosecution, and that concrete actions should continue to be taken in this respect. As it was already outlined earlier by Mr. Onidi, acting EU anti-trafficking coordinator, the EU continues to invest in improving the criminal justice response to trafficking in human beings, which should be adapted to each of forms of exploitation. As today's presentation showed, this is no easy issue. Prosecution is indeed a multifaceted process, and there are multiple factors that can undermine the efficiency of the crucial justice response to trafficking in human beings and ultimately lead to impunity. Due to the complex nature of the investigations of the cases, there is often insufficient evidence to sustain and prosecution and bring a case to court. Consequently, charges are sometimes brought against offenders of other crimes. The EU and its member states are committed to working closely with international partners to promote adherence to international legal standards on trafficking in persons in line with the UN TOC and the Palermo Protocols. The need to work together to enhance effective criminal justice responses to trafficking in human beings has also been recognized several times by participating states within the OSCE commitments. We believe that improvements can be reached by taking on board various views and good practices. The EU has always been a staunch supporter of partnerships to ensure effective cooperation and coordination of efforts in the fight against trafficking in human beings. Accordingly, we very much welcome the presence today and input of Ms. Cristina Cagnasputna as well as Ms. Gada Vali from the UNODC. And we believe that both the OSCE and UNODC very much benefit from sharing their analysis and taking into account their perspective on the best way to achieve the common goal of combating trafficking in human beings. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic has and will have consequences in the field of trafficking of human beings. As vulnerabilities are being compounded, new trafficking trends emerge, and shelter may be harder to access. In respect, we welcome the recommendations on short-term responses to COVID-19 issued by the OSCE Special Representative on Coordination for Trafficking in Human Beings, 5 of which relate to prosecution. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And I would like now to invite the distinguished representative of Holy See, followed by the United States of America. Holy See, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Addressing today's topic, Pope Francis said, "Since it is not possible to commit so complex a crime as human trafficking without the complicity by action or omission of states, the states are responsible for their citizens and before the international community." Regarding the statistics found in the concept note, we must wonder if as international community we have done everything possible to reduce the discrepancy between the high number of estimated victims and the low numbers of court proceedings and convictions. Participating states committing themselves to take necessary measures, including by adopting and implementing legislation to criminalize trafficking in human beings, with a view to ensure effective law enforcement, response, and persecution. There are several innovative and up-to-date regulations at the national and international levels, but we should ask, how much are these tools effectively applied? In addition, criminal justice systems are often not well funded, increasing the risk of criminals continuing their heinous work. Alternatively, result-oriented efforts are disproportionately channeled to pursue small-time operations and criminals rather than the big fish. Common good demands that access to justice, political representation, and the recognition of the dignity of others should be accessible to all, especially to the weak and the vulnerable. Pope Francis underscored that the fragile, vulnerable person is often defenseless before the interest of a deified market, which become the only rule. Judges, prosecutors, and other actors in the criminal justice systems should seize every opportunity to ensure that victims are fairly treated in accordance with their inalienable dignity as persons, and where possible to guarantee that criminal processes aid the victim's healing, as expressed in its decision 508. Finally, the COVID-19 pandemic has been a severe and unpredicted challenge for the whole world, amplifying and multiplying existing challenges. The immediate need to contain the transmission of the virus led countries to establish preventive measures. Some of these provisions leave victims of human trafficking in more desperate condition. In this current situation, countries need to keep shelters and hotlines open, safeguard access to justice, and prevent more people in vulnerable situations from falling into the hands of organized crime. The full statement will be sent for distribution. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much for your intervention, and I would like to invite now the United States of America to take the floor, followed by Afghanistan.
Good. Thank you very much. The representative from the Holy See was cutting in and out, so I hope you'll be able to hear me all right. You can hear me, madam, can't you?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much. The United States appreciates the chair's hard work in organizing this hybrid alliance against trafficking in persons conference during these challenging times of the COVID epidemic. We're pleased that this new format provides an expanded opportunity for our governments, the private sector, civil society to actively participate in this year's conference. During the pandemic, human traffickers have continued to monetize human beings, turn them into money, turn them into a commodity, while inflicting traumatic physical and psychological harm on victims and their loved ones. So we've got to maintain our focus on combating trafficking in persons, protecting trafficking victims, and prosecuting human traffickers. And Madam, I could advise you that the United States intends to pursue this vigorously this year as in major programs that we want to participate in and even initiate. These 3 Ps of the Palermo Protocol, which is prosecution of traffickers, protection of trafficking victims, and prevention of trafficking in persons, guides our work in the OSCE and at home. We appreciate this year's focus on the first of the 3 Ps, which is prosecution. The United States Congress is very focused on this issue, and countries, in fact, are judged by this very element. So we're very grateful for this focus. The United States is a party to the Palermo Protocol, and under our own Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, believes that effective law enforcement and criminal justice response to human trafficking is an essential element of efforts to fight human trafficking. Madam, if you give me indulge me for just about a half a minute, I would like to mention that not only am I the ambassador and former governor, but I was also the Attorney General of the state of Virginia in the United States. And in addition to that, I was the elected prosecutor within my home jurisdiction near the Richmond area. And I want to point out several experiences very quickly. One was that when I was the prosecutor, I established a victim witness assistance program in my home county of Henrico County. And the purpose of that was to actually get the victims to actually report back to court on behalf of the prosecution and to be there to give evidence. Our experience was that many of the victims were fearful and frightened, particularly in domestic situations and sexual abuse situations. They were scared and often were persuaded between court appearances to never show back up. The Victim Witness Assistance Program got the victims and the witnesses to court so that they would testify honestly and openly, which led to more prosecutions. I think there's value in this type of approach and value in making sure that police understand that the victims are not often participants in the crime, but are being coerced in the crime. And I think more education and training in that, both police worldwide and prosecutors, would lead to more prosecutions and therefore more costs of the crime and therefore some deterrence. This is important work, and we understand that these issues you have raised in this are incredibly important and educational. So in closing, this year marks the 20th anniversary of the Palermo Protocol. The United States remains steadfast in its commitment to the protocol and stating unequivocally there's no excuse for human trafficking. This is something that we need to spend more time on. People need to understand better. They need to have a different approach on prosecution. And governments have got to take bold action to bring necessary reforms. Together with our partners in civil society and the private sector, let's use these several days to engage and learn how to increase prosecution of traffickers with a victim-centered, trauma-informed approach. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, and specific thanks for your personal experiences. I would now like to invite distinguished representative of Afghanistan to take the floor, followed by Malta.
Dear moderator, excellencies, dear colleagues. On behalf of Ambassador Ibrahim Khel, I will be delivering the statement. I would like to begin to thank Mr. Valian Rishi to the Office of the Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings for the successful organization of this high-level conference. Let me also thank the panelists for their insightful statements and presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem of human trafficking in human beings is not foreign to Afghanistan. As a major hub at the crossroad of Central Asia, the Middle East, and South Asia, Afghanistan serves and acts as connecting land bridge between various civilizations and ethnic groups. Unfortunately, due to protracted conflicts in the country, the expansion of regional and international crime organizations, this very same landscape that served as gateway of cultural connectivity and melting pot of different ethnicity, turned into center of international terrorism and become a victim of human traffickers. As a victim of this global challenge, Afghanistan has made tremendous progress to tackle the challenge of trafficking of human beings. For the last 1 decade, Afghanistan, supported by its partners in international community, adopted national legislation, implemented regional and international legal instruments, created relevant institution and law enforcement capacity at its borders and airport, and became part of bilateral, regional, and international mechanisms. To combat human trafficking, a few important examples consist of accession to the Trafficking in Persons Protocol in August 2014, and to Smuggling of Migrants Protocol in February 2017. Enactment of law to combat trafficking in person and smuggling of migrants in December 2018. Establishment of High Commission for Combating Crimes of Abduction, Inhuman Trafficking, and Smuggling. Furthermore, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan and UNODC have recently strengthened cooperation and partnership in countering trafficking in human beings with a new joint project, the Global Action to Prevent and Address Trafficking in Person and Smuggling of Migrants in Asia and Middle East. This project is new opportunity to cooperate with UNODC in countering trafficking in person and smuggling of migrants. The United Nations Global Action Plan to Prevent Trafficking of Persons and United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organization Crime and its protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, remain the overall international framework for decisive action to combat human trafficking in all its aspects. Afghanistan is a party to the said convention, and we have put in place several legislation to criminalize various forms of human trafficking. Additionally, we are grateful to USAID for combating human trafficking in Afghanistan project, co-founded by International Organization for Migration that works with our government to effectively prevent trafficking, prosecute traffickers, protect victims, and improve regional coordination to combat cross-road trafficking. Ladies and gentlemen, we rely on the capacity of international and regional organizations such as the OAC and UNODC to establish and strengthen a harmonized approach to combat human trafficking and increase prosecution, particularly through its field operation. The OAC is well positioned to contribute to both national and regional efforts against trafficking in person in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has already greatly benefited from its engagement with the OAC, including from the assistance projects for Afghanistan focused primarily on border management, border security, custom control, combating human and drug trafficking. Taking this opportunity, I would like to thank all those countries which are hosting Afghan refugees, especially in such times of globally difficult economic situation. And we reiterate our commitment to fight this global challenge and look forward to our continued cooperation in this area of mutual concern. I thank you.
Thank you for your intervention, and I would now like to invite the distinguished representative of Malta to take the floor, followed by Ludmila Denisova from Ukraine. Please take the floor.
In the interest of time, I will deliver a shortened version of our statement. I align myself with the statement delivered by the European Union, but would like to make the following remarks in my national capacity. Allow me to start by thanking the Office of the Special Representative for its work and for this opportunity to continue reflecting on ways how to ensure that perpetrators are brought to justice and prosecuted. As we have seen, this is perhaps the crime that goes mostly unpunished, unfortunately. One way of addressing today's subject is by strengthening the partnerships between the law enforcement agencies and local communities. As it was emphasized during the regional seminar organized by the OSCE, the IOM, and the UNODC in Malta last December, the involvement of grassroots organizations is key, not only in the identification and providing preliminary information on the victim or the perpetrator, but also to educate and create awareness within the community. Furthermore, as we have already heard, investigative and prosecution legislations need to be sensitive to the vulnerabilities of the victims and safeguard their protection. At the international level, regional and international institutions are crucial instruments in providing technical assistance and capacity building measures to ensure that states have the necessary tools to combat human trafficking and also act as platforms for exchange of information. In recognition of the need to act against these brutal crimes, Malta was one of the over 70 countries to have endorsed the call to action to end forced labor, modern slavery, and human trafficking, launched by leaders at the UN General Assembly in 2017, to the 1930 Forced Labor Convention. And as we continue our fight, we are very proud that Malta will officially join the UNODC Blue Heart campaign, contributing to its voluntary trust fund. In conclusion, I reaffirm my country's commitment to upholding the effective implementation of international obligations to end impunity and to ensure that the punishment of the perpetrators will indeed match their heinous crime. We express our strong commitment to continue working with the OSCE and other international institutions on this front. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. And I would like to invite now Ms. Ludmila Denisova from Ukraine to take the floor, followed by Mr. Angel Tilvar from Romania. And please keep your interventions very short.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Я буду через цифры. И около 7 тысяч
I'd like to look at some figures. Around 70,000 Ukrainian citizens, including 2,000 from the Russian Federation, were involved in trafficking cases. Victims of human trafficking were involved also in the transport of drugs and other substances. Over the last 4 years, the Ukrainian police has investigated more than 200 crimes in this area. When Ukrainians learn about this inflow of drugs and other goods, then these are investigated and these activities are stopped. The law enforcement then take action and prosecution goes ahead. We do not always have the needed communication channels with other agencies elsewhere around the world to properly investigate these cases and to ensure justice for the victims. And with the Russian Federation, for example, there are problems with ensuring that people have a recognized status of victim, and a problem with ensuring that a due punishment is delivered at these crimes. More than 150 people have been established as victims, and a number of them have been established as victims of transporter crimes. So it's very difficult, without proper evidence, it's very difficult to actually properly investigate these crimes. Also, we have citizens who have been sentenced for such crimes in Greece, for example. They were involved, they were recruited by Turkish firms acting in our country, recruited to work in Turkey, and in fact they were bringing in illegal migrants and into Greece. our citizens do not have proper legal aid, no interpreters. They don't have any possibility for proving their innocence. There's no proper medical aid also, and poor conditions of detention. Also in Italy, we have people who've been sentenced for up to 10 years and who don't have a possibility to so it would be good to be able to give our people the chance to properly have the chance to prove their innocence, and more effort to combat human trafficking. And this will require coordinated efforts by all countries and the OSCE, more innovative approaches in combating this kind of crime. We call on all countries to help each other to protect the rights of people who have been victims of trafficking, to ensure effective and objective criminal investigations, and to return the people to their countries, and to recognize their status as victims of human trafficking. Thank you for organizing this conference, and thank you for your cooperation.
Thank you for your remarks, and I would like to invite Mr. Angelo Tilvar from Romania to give the floor, and please, we are losing the interpretation very soon, so keep your remarks very, very short.
Thank you very much, Chair, dear colleagues. It was the quest for effective means to eradicate the scourge of trafficking in human beings that led to setting up of the parliamentary group for fighting against human trafficking within the Parliament of Romania. The objectives pursued by the Alliance Against Trafficking in Persons Forum, which aims at building inclusive partnerships and strengthening cooperation at all levels, are fully in line with those carried out by the Romanian Parliamentary Group. Dear friends, the subject matter of this year's conference is highly relevant. Effective prosecution against perpetrators has to be conducted with the primary aim of proving justice for victims of human trafficking. Among the topics that could be discussed in this panel, I would like to point out two issues: the importance of relevant data and the need for cooperation. Firstly, the starting point for any public policy is to get reliable data and information that are further processed, meaning that these are translated into those sustainable, appropriate, and realistic public policies. Figures made public by the Romanian National Agency Against the Trafficking of Persons reveal some concerns. While the number of victims as well as of the minor victims declined, the incidence of trafficking for labor exploitation increased. Latest figures show also a significant reduction in exploitation for forced begging and criminal activities. Unfortunately, trafficking for sexual exploitation continues to take the lead, followed by trafficking for labor exploitation. All this data have to ask for more in-depth reflections on potential future actions against trafficking in persons. Secondly, cooperation, both at internal and international levels, has to place the victim at its center. Regarding the international cooperation, I would like to offer you a recent example. At the end of February this year, impressive results of an action against an organized criminal group suspected of human trafficking, pimping, and money laundering were brought to the attention of the public. For dismantling that criminal gang, law enforcement and judicial authorities from Romania and Spain cooperated each other and with the European Union Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation, with Eurojust. The latter played a key role in coordination as regular movements of members of the criminal gang made it more difficult for law enforcement and judicial authorities to react accordingly. In other words, the example that I have just offered serves to describe the high transnational nature of this crime of trafficking in human beings, which requires coordinated responses at the international, European, and regional level. Dear friend, while Romania is a source, transit, and destination country for trafficking in human beings, at the same time, it is the most active source country involved in joining investigation teams, I hope, in order to combat this trafficking in human beings. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your intervention. And then the last speaker I'm inviting to speak is the UN Peace University. Please, you have the floor.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much for this very important conference and allowing us to speak. I've served in the United Nations for more than 20 years. I'm a member of the UN's Anti-Trafficking Task Team, and this year I've piloted an anti-trafficking research lab at the UN Peace University in Costa Rica. Our mission is to develop data-driven perpetrator research for applied policy solutions, specifically to improve child sex trafficking investigations and prosecutions. We aim to fill a major data gap. For example, of 220 US government trafficking grants from 2001 to 2018, only one even mentions perpetrators. In over 1,000 recent trafficking studies, perpetrators are only mentioned twice. The most recent US federal data on child sex trafficking details 37,000 referrals from 2006 to 2013, 82% of whom were white men. But beyond this basic demographic, little else is known. There's a critical need for comprehensive predator data. Our anti-trafficking research lab is focused on meeting this need by building a public searchable arrest and prosecution database, increasing research capacity and publication focused on investigations and prosecutions, and fostering intensive training for the next generation of global experts, including my first research fellow, Maeve Brannigan from Ireland, who's here with me today. There's a need for perpetrator data designed to enhance investigations and increase successful prosecutions. My anti-trafficking research lab hopes to meet this and partner with all of you in working to end impunity for child sex trafficking around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I would like to thank all the speakers for giving it relatively short. I would also very much like to thank our wonderful panelists who really gave some insights and some solutions also to the difficult question on how to increase successful prosecutions. With this, I would like to close this meeting, but before closing, for those who are virtually connected, there will be a Twitter wall for some time for you to see, so you could see some of the Twitters which have been sent. Thank you for everybody, and have a very nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Finally, we will see you all tomorrow, and I just wanted to thank the hardest working people in this conference, the interpreters, for giving us a few extra minutes of their time. Thank you so much for your work. We greatly appreciate it. And to the audience online, we will see you tomorrow afternoon Vienna time. Thank you so much.